So Dr. Meredith Jennings is a research associate at HARC, the Houston Advanced Research Center, and she's working to build cross-disciplinary partnerships and programs that promote community resilience and lessen the impacts of climate change. Previous projects include the City of Houston Climate Action Plan, as well as the City of Houston's Resilient Houston Strategy. And Dr. Jennings was also a founding member of the Houston Harris Heat Action Team that organized Houston Harris County's 2020 Heat Watch campaign with Kappa Strategies and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Meredith. Meredith, do you need to share your screen?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great, perfect.
Wait, let's see. Okay. Okay.
Awesome. And just before Meredith gets started, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then we'll go through the questions during the Q&A.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I've got like the 2 monitors set up, so let's see if I can manage to see you guys and give this presentation. So thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me. I'm really excited to share this project with you all. And I was actually a member of the Houston Climate Movement before I came to HARC when I was a science policy fellow, just having moved to Houston, trying to figure out what was going on with climate change in Houston. And so it's really meaningful to me to be able to try and stay connected with you guys and support and follow what you're doing. So this project is about urban heat islands, and it was a really, it involved citizen science. It involved coming together with multiple partners that work on climate kind of tangentially, but kind of putting urban heat in the forefront for the first time for Houston. And so it was really exciting to be a part of that. So the Houston Harris Heat Action Team is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy of Texas, Jaime Gonzalez, Harris County Public Health, Resilient Houston, Marissa Aho, and we worked with another organization called Kappa Strategies, who was funded by NOAA to do this heat mapping exercise. And through this, we also partner with our local National Weather Service office, which is really fun. They're a really good group of people. So, and again, I'm at HARC, and we're located in the Woodlands. Okay, so I was given, I think, 2 questions to try and answer today, so that, or at least share with you all and for us to discuss is, and one is, how does heat impact our region? And we'll kind of leave that open-ended. But to begin, let's first acknowledge that it's a weird time to talk about heat, right? I know it's nice and warm today, but I think we're looking at freezing temperatures later this week. But oftentimes we're having these conversations and trying to get people excited about heat when it's not hot outside, and that's always an uphill battle. So so first of all, as we go through the results of this study, let's try and channel our inner Houston summer and forget that it's February. And so first of all, thinking about urban heat and the impacts on communities, it helps to get a sense of where and how we interact with heat. And so these pictures are taken with a FLIR thermal camera, and this one's just a simple one that you can attach to your phone. I know a lot of building inspectors and contractors use them to help identify inefficiencies in your house, but they can also help tell us more about our built environment and our natural environment. Where do we see heat being absorbed by, dark surfaces? Where do we see it being reflected? Where do we see shade or other, I guess, factors playing into whether something heats up or not? So everything in these pictures you see that's like orange or yellow, that's either giving off heat or absorbing heat. And then all the purple and dark colors are reflecting or cooler. So you see here, if you're waiting for the bus in Gulfton, the 32, you're lucky that you actually have this little overhang to potentially keep yourself in the shade. Because walking down the sidewalk in Houston in the middle of summer could be potentially pretty hot. Playgrounds are notorious, unfortunately, for getting really, really hot during the summer. And so it's, important when we think about designing parks and playgrounds, how those surfaces will either will keep your child safe, really. And if you see here in the background, these are pictures of apartments and cars. If sometimes buildings are older, they're not poorly insulated, or just based on not having any trees or other shade, they're taking on a bigger load to cool. And so often people have really high electricity bills that burden their budgets. And so if we have additional, energy efficiency or the impact of this tree here, we can see can hopefully help to make energy burdens not be so bad. So I'm talking to the Houston climate movement, so I have to talk about how urban heat interacts with climate change, right? And so I'm speaking to the choir, but the number of days in our future that are going to be above 100 degrees Fahrenheit depends on our emissions that we emit today. And whether or not we're going to take climate action to reduce those emissions or continue business as usual is going to really tell how horrible our future might be. So this is a picture from the city's climate impact assessment. And so this is at the Houston Hobby Airport, where you can see the blue lines are, those lower emissions, we're taking climate action, and the red is if we just do nothing. So we're putting ourselves in jeopardy in the future to have worse and worse summers. And this is another way of looking at it. This is the top part is again taking climate action. The bottom, business as usual. I know this goes really fast, so it'll loop a couple of times. But then again, the number of days that go above 100 degrees Fahrenheit is what this is showing, depending on whether or not you take climate action or not. So it's pretty, I think, pretty powerful. I'll let it go through one more time. Out to 2100. So the other question that I was asked was, who is most at risk? And so there's, the CDC will tell you, oh, it's people of a certain age with certain conditions, things like that. But it is a little bit more complicated than that. And so this is a nice framework that we like to use when we think about urban heat vulnerability. So first of all is what is your exposure? And so that will change depending on how the climate changes. Just the normal variability, like what we're seeing this week, 70 degrees and then 29 degrees. And then how the urban heat island might make heat worse in some places than in others, because all of that heat that I showed you in the built environment is absorbed or given off and makes that worse in certain areas. Then there's the sensitivity. So really young children, older adults, people with certain health conditions. I think if you have kidney or heart disease, those things make you more susceptible to heat-related illnesses. And then there's, general social vulnerabilities. So, and then the third component here is, what is your adaptive capacity? So you could have the same exposure and sensitivity as someone else in another part of town, but you may have more household and community resources to help manage that exposure and sensitivity. So if you have a house that's energy efficient, or if you live in a neighborhood with lots of trees, or you don't have to take the bus to go to work and have to wait 30 minutes at a bus stop with no shade, those are things that other people have to deal with that are based on this adaptive capacity. And so there are external drivers that make these things worse, like climate change. As I showed you, the number of days is going to increase that reach above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Urbanization makes the urban heat island effect worse. Population changes, and then the social determinants of health, which is a whole nother thing, but that's sort of what kinds of, again, resources are available to different communities that make them more resilient and healthier. Then on the flip side, adaptation is the solution, right? And so the drivers are making things worse. We hope that we can find ways to adapt to make things better. And so it's sort of a seesaw effect. So if there are more ways to adapt to extreme heat, then we can potentially reduce the exposure, reduce the sensitivity, and increase the adaptive capacity. And so ways that you can adapt to extreme heat are through urban design, land use, improving how we warn people, either through the weather service or through those alerts that you get on your phone, different types of community programs around heat, and the public health education and outreach, and also public assistance. So there are some things that people do have access to, like utility assistance and energy efficiency programs, but oftentimes the people that need them most are the least aware of these programs. So making those more accessible to people is another component. So if just to focus in on one of those things, how can we mitigate or adapt to heat through urban design? And so there are some proven strategies that you can take at the neighborhood level, like cool roofs and cool pavement, green roofs, adding additional shade, and again, improving energy efficiency. And I'm sure you're aware of Resilient Houston strategy that the city of Houston published earlier in 2020. And they have an action dedicated just to combating extreme heat through urban design. And so that's Action 16. You can read all about it. And actually this urban heat island mapping campaign that I'm going to share with you is one of the sub-actions. And so the campaign, we conducted it on one day. So this is just a snapshot in time, and isn't meant to replace, long-term studies of climate risk in Houston, but it does tell us, how heat is different across all of these areas. And so each of these little shapes represents one area where a volunteer or a team of volunteers went out and drove along a predetermined route with a sensor attached to their car at 3 different times of day. And so in total, we ended up getting 84 volunteers. We had 32 routes, which was the largest mapping campaign that NOAA and CAPA had ever done. And in total, we made over 200,000 measurements, which was the most for any campaign. So it's pretty exciting. And since there was a partnership between the city and the county, we really tried to capture areas that were important for both of those jurisdictions. So that's why this map doesn't really align to any particular school of thought, but it does include areas in unincorporated Harris County and in Pasadena, Baytown, Aldine, and then we have a lot of most of the complete communities are captured in this. And I believe I already mentioned the organizing members of the Houston Harris Heat Action Team, and we worked with Joey Williams and Vivek Chandas at CAPA. So all of this again wouldn't be possible without those 84 volunteers. This is just a small glimpse of who participated and actually collected the measurements. And so this also gives you an idea of what the sensors look like. So they attach to the window of the car, I think you can see right there. And each person had there was a driver and a navigator so that you could make sure you were driving the same route each time and making any observations about what you saw, if there was something that we needed to know in order to better understand what the results meant. These links I'm sure will be shared with you afterward, but we do have a website that's h3at.org. And on there, you can read our report. You can actually play with the data on a web app. And then we also created a story map that will walk you through some of the results that I'm going to share. And so I think this is probably the most important thing, because if you understand this slide, then you can play with the data all you want and it'll make sense. So there are, I guess, starting with the data. So those little sensors collected temperature and humidity. And together those things can calculate heat index, which is your feels like temperature. And so here in Houston, where humidity is really high, that feels like temperature can be upwards of, well, what we measured some upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So the apparent temperature plus the humidity usually results in a higher heat index. So there's the collected data and the derived data. And then there's these two different formats. So this one on the left is what makes the most sense when you think about a mapping campaign. So each of these squiggly lines is literally someone in their car driving, collecting these measurements. And then there's the modeled results, which take the observations and use an algorithm to extrapolate it to a larger area using satellite imagery. And so this is all work that CAPA Strategies has done, and they've done lots of studies that demonstrate that their modeling works. So let's see, I've got, how much more time, Stephanie?
A few minutes, but I think if everyone's okay, we can extend your speaking time a little bit.
Okay, well, I don't want to give people whiplash, but really what I just wanted to just kind of walk through some of the highlights. So as I mentioned, we had those 32 different routes and we did this at 3 different times of day. So volunteers were out mapping at 6 to 7 in the morning so that we could get a baseline and before the day heated up. And this also kind of tells us what the overnight temperature would be. In the morning, there was no wind. So pretty much everywhere that you see heat concentrated is because it's like trapped somewhere. It's like being produced and then trapped. It just never went away overnight. And so it's really clear where you can see downtown, that urban heat island effect. And then other areas along the ship channel where you have a lot of industry. So pretty much in the morning, there was an 11-degree difference between the hottest point and the lowest point. So Greater Greens Point, all these communities along I-45 is where we saw the warmest temperature. And then the coolest was over in Setgast. And I'll point out, in general, through our study, we saw that the closer you were to the coast, the cooler you were. But it was interesting that, like in Baytown, where you have this is the ExxonMobil facility, you can see that it was warm in the morning, and so all of that industrial activity kept that area from cooling down. And so why do we really care about overnight temperatures? This, even though it's kind of counterintuitive, where you think the maximum temperature is what correlates most to the heat-related illness and other things, it's actually the minimum temperature that is what is most predictive of heat risk. And so this is a map that shows, in color, is the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. So the dark blue is where areas are 75% more vulnerable than other areas in Texas, other census tracts in Texas. And then the data points are filtered to show temperatures that were above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So, and we had a malfunction in this area 10, so I can't tell you whether or not it was above 80, but I just wanted to highlight that. And so we do see a lot of the areas that are more socially vulnerable are not cooling below 80 degrees at night. And that could imply that these have a higher health risk because they're just not cooling down. So that's something we want to look more into. This is the modeled results. So I'll just pass through that really quickly. The afternoon was driven from 3 to 4. And the hottest temperature was at Richmond and Chimney Rock, right by an elementary school. And the lowest was in Channelview. And so this was a 17-degree difference. And our partners at Kappa Strategy said this was the largest difference in a campaign that they'd measured. So it just kind of tells you that even though you might look at one, airport measurement to say, oh, it's 80 degrees in Houston, that number could vary quite a bit depending on where you are. This is looking at the heat index above 108, and the green is tree canopy. So just kind of another way of looking at this. So 108 is the threshold that the National Weather Service uses to declare that there's a heat advisory. And so this day didn't trigger a heat advisory according to the National Weather Service protocol, but we measured a lot of areas that were above 108 and even above 115. So that I found was interesting. And a lot of it is along I-45 to the north, and then in the Southwest Freeway. This is just the modeled results. And in the evening, that was from 7 to 8. Here we see a 12-degree difference, where the average was 89. And so the warmest temperature was Acres-Home, and the lowest was Spring Branch. And there was actually a little precipitation that came through, and that's why we think that this area got cooled off a little bit. And then there's a model result, and this is probably too too much information, but it's something that we are also looking at, is how much are these areas cooling off overnight. So all this is doing is subtracting the morning temperature from the evening temperature, so we can look at how much was cooled overnight. But that also depends on how much it heated up during the day and how much it cooled off at night. And so, but it at least kind of highlights which areas stay hot and which ones are able to cool off at night and provide some relief and some health, hopefully some positive health impacts. So that's a lot of information thrown at you, but I just wanted to give you kind of the tools and overview of this resource. And I really do hope it's a resource for you all. And I'm really interested in working with community members, with organizations that are interested in, how can we adapt and give our communities resources to mitigate heat. And so if you have any ideas on what we should be looking at next or doing next, if you want to use this to come up with a tree planting strategy or pilot something cool, we want to know, and we want to partner with you and find ways to help. So if you have any other questions or ideas, just email me, and you can also sign up for updates on our website, and that's h3at.org. So I'm happy to entertain any questions and feedback.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith, for that presentation. Marshall, are you?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Meredith, so much for sharing all of this information. I wanted to mention if there's any questions, just to reiterate that, to please put them in the chat. I have seen a couple of questions coming in, so maybe we can start with those, Meredith, while other people share theirs. So I guess the first one came in before you started sharing your presentations about when the heat measurements were taken. But we can look at Deborah's question. Is there any sort of tech of bus stops to cool them? Does a reflective material incorporating mylar, for instance, make a difference?
Well, the date was August 7th, and that was also chosen based on looking at the outlook with the National Weather Service. So we wanted to find a day that was going to be dry and hot, and we had to try and mobilize all of this within 2 or 3 days notice. So that was why that day was picked. So I am not really aware of any intentional thing to cool bus stops. I know there's been a few projects that have done this in like pilots, but nothing that like Metro has said we're gonna do this. And that was just one example that I had shown that did have an awning. When I would take the bus to work when I lived in Houston, I didn't have an awning, and my bus came every 30 minutes. So it's not something that's uniform. And I know that kind of comfort is something that Link Houston is looking at. And so we are trying to talk to them about ways that this data could potentially be used. And I'm not an engineer, but I would love to follow up more on this mylar and other reflective materials that could be used on the bus stop. So thank you for that. Oh, okay. So Nancy had a question. Looking at the projections out to 2100, far west Harris County is the hottest part of the county, even though it's not the most built up part. That is an interesting question, and I think it's meteorology, and so the further you are, so the coast has a cooling effect, and then there is this phenomena of like the urban heat and pollution that is produced in the middle of Houston. It gets pushed by the wind to other places. So there's some mixing and transport of that heat. And so I think that is coming through in the climate projections as well, because what they're doing is looking at the historical plus the predicted climatology. So that's my guess. I would be happy to follow up with that. I know that's something we're looking at HARC is a regional look at these downscale climate projections. So another question from Nancy is on current plans to plant trees. So Houston Wilderness is, I think, taking the lead on the Resilient Houston goal to plant 4.6 million new native trees by 2030. So I can't speak to what the exact plans are, but there is a target to plant more trees. And so that is definitely its own thing that's going and moving forward. And with the resilience officer as part of this heat action team, she is very interested in making sure that trees are planted strategically in places that need them the most in terms of needing to cool off from the urban heat island effect. And ones that need, again, that additional adaptive capacity compared to like River Oaks doesn't need more trees.
I just had a quick, I feel like I did want to add, if someone did want to go off mute for a second and maybe add follow-up thoughts, please feel free to do that. Because I had a quick follow-up thought, because I was wondering if maybe the Nature Conservancy had done studies or thoughts on like prairie restoration or like doing wetland restoration as opposed to tree planting or in conjunction with trees being planted. Is that a strategy that's also being looked at?
There is a prairie restoration project that I'm also familiar that just kicked off earlier this year. And that is, yeah, that is something that they're looking at, is how can we also use prairies to help cool it's not always just about tree planting, but there are other benefits from other nature-based solutions.
Awesome. And then maybe we can do the last two questions. Jimmy's question is, what adaptive strategies contribute the most to mitigation?
Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that has to do with like neighborhood level conditions and like what the residents want and currently experience. And so I think I'm actually working on a proposal right now that'll help follow up to this project. And it's by NOAA. So if we get it, we would be able to dive a little bit deeper and really get more lived experience from residents that are most impacted by heat and have their, involvement and participation in a research project help guide like what questions to ask and what mitigation strategies they're most interested in seeing. But we are wanting to better understand what the relationship of tree canopy is, because as I showed you, there were areas in like Aldine that had really, really high heat index in the afternoon, but those areas have pretty good tree canopy coverage. So it may not be tree planting is the end all be all. There might be other solutions that might help with breezes, with shade, with other things that we use to mitigate heat risk.
Oh, Marshall, you're on mute.
Oh, I was just saying Ed Brown's question, were you using conservative or aggressive climate change in your present to 2100 heat projection model?
So it was the RCP 8.5 and 4.5. So so that was, I think they, what would you guys call 4.5? That's not really aggressive, but they say realistic, right? So yeah, so that was, I would say that's a conservative, and then you know, the conservative being the business as usual. And that heat that model is the same that was used in the city's climate impact assessment. But we worked with Ann Stoner and Catherine Hayhoe, who did that assessment, to expand it to the surrounding counties. So we have more of the data than what the city obtained through that partnership.
Awesome. And one more question coming in. There's so many amazing questions, but I think maybe we'll just go with one more. Are there any other plans to expand on this study? It seems amazing that when people move, we often consider flood risks, but not heat risks.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. So a lot of times things that mitigate flood or exacerbate flooding also are related to heat, like the development, the impervious pavement, the lack of nature-based solutions to help absorb some of the water. All those things, if we implemented those, they could also help with urban heat. There's a lot of co-benefits. So tree canopy helps with stormwater runoff. It helps with urban heat. But like we mentioned, those prairies, they help absorb water. They also help cool the air. So there are a lot of things that when we talk about resilience in Houston, oftentimes we're talking about flooding, but urban heat is a big issue, and we'll, as I showed you with the climate projections, are going to continue to be a big issue for Houston. And I know there was a comment about air conditioning, but another climate indicator that I could have shown you was cooling degree days, and how that is going to increase with climate change. And so I don't know about you, but my electric bill is kind of high in the summer. And so again, thinking about vulnerability by including adaptive capacity, like how well can people cope with heat? Not everyone has an air conditioner, period, that they can use to cool off. And so as much as we like to think of that as the solution, unfortunately, higher energy burdens and other costs are not the solution for everyone.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you, Meredith, and I wanted to hand it over back to Stephanie. Thank you so much for answering these questions.
Yeah.
I know Judah asked some questions regarding youth, so we've been working closely together, so I'll definitely get in touch with you regarding that.
Great. Yeah, happy to follow up, and I'll hop off so you guys can have your meeting. And again, thank you so much for letting me share this with you. And Stephanie, if possible, I would love to get the comments in the chat so that I can follow up on some of these things. It's really helpful to hear your questions and feedback as we continue to develop more projects around this. So hope everyone has a great evening, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for joining today. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.